What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA
Monday, March 29th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, first of all, sorry about the echo. I'm in that studio that echoes. We're working on it. We got to get some stuff in here to pad the room. But for the next couple of days, we're going to have to deal with this echo, so I apologize. But now we have an 11-game slate tonight. So let's take a look at the point guard position. I like Eric Bledsoe from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Boston Celtics, who have a good defense overall and they're middle of the pack defending opposing point guards. Eric Bledsoe has averaged 22.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 15, 39, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 34, and 33 minutes. So he's playing a ton of minutes, but he's kind of hit or miss. If he's going to get you 10 or 25 plus fantasy points, it's definitely a gamble, but he's projected at 24 fantasy points here tonight. And on FanDuel, that's 5.9 times value. He's only $4,100 FanDuel salary, but he is $700 more on DraftKings. So that would be closer to 5 times value on DraftKings if he gets 24 fantasy points. So I definitely prefer that FanDuel price where he doesn't need much to get you 5 times value. Now he scored 16, 18, 19, and 25 fantasy points in the last 4 games versus the Boston Celtics. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 230.5 points scored in this game. So we got a high scoring game. So I like Eric Bledsoe, especially on FanDuel here versus the Boston Celtics. Okay, another point guard that I like, I think his price is still way too low on FanDuel and even on DraftKings. I like Malcolm Brogdon from the Indiana Pacers playing the Washington Wizards, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Malcolm Brogdon has averaged 37.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He scored 34 and 26 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 28 and 32 minutes. So his usage rate, it looks like it's gone down just about 2 or 3% with the addition of Karis LeVert, but he's still getting plenty of minutes and his production has been fine. He's projected at 36.5 fantasy points here tonight. On FanDuel, that's 5.6 times value. He's $6,500 FanDuel salary and $500 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price, but I think he can hit 5 times value or more on DraftKings as well. And he scored 40, 36, 33, 31, and 33 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Wizards. Vegas thinks there's going to be 234.5 points scored in this game. It's a fantastic matchup in a high-paced game. I really like this play, especially on FanDuel. So I like Malcolm Brogdon here versus the Washington Wizards.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching. If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal, all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won, and then we'll send you $100 PayPal. So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, another player that I like, a little bit more so on DraftKings, is Derrick Rose from the New York Knicks playing the Miami Heat, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing point guards. Derrick Rose has averaged 25.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 24 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 24 fantasy points last game in 29 minutes with a 24% usage rate. He's projected at 28.7 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's 5,500 FanDuel salary, but he's 600 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So he would get you 5 times value on DraftKings, even if he only scored 24 fantasy points. So I like that. And he scored 24, 34, and 41 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Heat. So I like Derrick Rose here versus the Miami Heat. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Tyler Hero from the Miami Heat playing the New York Knicks, who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing shooting guards. Tyler Hero has averaged 28 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 20, 47, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 35, and 26 minutes. He's projected at 28 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 5,700 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. Now he scored 28, 27, and 21 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Knicks. And Vegas does only think there's going to be 208 points scored in this game. So I wouldn't stack this game, but I think Tyler Hero has a nice low price point on both sides for a nice mid-range play who has 35 to 45 plus fantasy point upside if he gets going. So I like Tyler Hero here versus the New York Knicks. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Demar Derozan from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Sacramento Kings, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Demar Derozan has averaged 38.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He scored 42, 34, and 26 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 31, 31, and 28 minutes. He's projected at 38.2 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.5 times value because he's 8,400 FanDuel salary, but he's 500 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Now he scored 44, 24, 41, 36, and 40 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Kings. It's a great matchup, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 228 points scored in this game, and it's a fast-paced game. So I like Demar Derozan, especially on DraftKings. I'll probably only play Demar Derozan on DraftKings here versus the Sacramento Kings. Okay, who do we have at the small forward position? Now, I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Nicholas Batum from the LA Clippers playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Nicholas Batum has averaged 21.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 12% usage rate. He scored 20, 23, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 30, and 26 minutes. He's projected at 21.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's 4,100 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. He scored 18, 24, and 28 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Bucks. He's been consistently scoring, 4 out of his past 5 games. He's gotten 20 fantasy points or more, so he's getting you 5 times value or more, playing a ton of minutes, and he has that every once in a while 29 to 30 point fantasy upside, which would crush value. So I think he's a pretty safe value play, although he does have a low floor. Sometimes he'll score a 4 or a 9. About 20% of the time, he'll bust your lineup. But I like Nicholas Batum here versus the Milwaukee Bucks.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, another small forward that I like is Jalen Brown from the Boston Celtics playing the New Orleans Pelicans, who have the 10th worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Jalen Brown has averaged 39.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He's scored 25, 28, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 30, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 38.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 7,700 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. So I like this pick here tonight because he's kind of been slumping the past couple of games, hasn't really played up to par. So I'm expecting him to hit his season average or more to get you 5 times value or more on both sites. And he scored 43, 25, 24, and 32 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pelicans. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 230.5 points scored in this game. So it's a good matchup, a fast-paced game, and a high-scoring game, and a player that is due to hit his season average and get you 5 times value or more. So I like Jalen Brown here versus the New Orleans Pelicans. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Kristaps Porzingis from the Dallas Mavericks playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Kristaps Porzingis has averaged 37.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 58 and 54 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 37 and 28 minutes. So he's been on fire, and he's projected at 38.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 7,900 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. He scored 34 and 37 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Thunder. It's a great matchup. Vegas thinks there's going to be 217 points scored in this game. I'm going to see if I can ride the hot hand here. If he scores 50 fantasy points or more, he will crush value on both sides. So I like Kristaps Porzingis here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay, another power forward that I like, another guy that's been on fire, I like Zion Williamson from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Boston Celtics. who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing power forwards. Zion Williamson has averaged 42.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 49, 65, and 47 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 34, 38, and 28 minutes. And he scored 41 and 48 fantasy points in the 2 games before that. So he's on a 5-game streak here, scoring 40 fantasy points or more. He's projected at 43.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. But I think he can get you 45 fantasy points here, get you 5 times value or more. He's 9,000 FanDuel salary and 200 less on DraftKings. Now he scored 46 and 36 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Celtics. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 230.5 points scored in this game. I think this is a good game to stack, although this is an 11-game slate, so plenty of options, no pressure to jam all these players in, but I do like getting some exposure to this game, so I like Zion Williamson here versus the Boston Celtics. Okay, moving on to the center position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like James Wiseman from the Golden State Warriors playing the Chicago Bulls, who have the 13th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing centers. James Wiseman has averaged 22.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 21 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 26, 11, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 26, 29, and 25 minutes. He's projected at 25 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 6.3 times value. He's 4,000 FanDuel salary, but he is 1,200 more on DraftKings. So this is a FanDuel play for me only. And he scored 16 fantasy points in his last game versus the Chicago Bulls, but he's playing a lot more minutes than he was in the past, playing 25 minutes or more the last 3 games. And I just think his FanDuel price is way too low, considering that he only needs 25 fantasy points to get you 6.3 times value. That's doable here versus the Bulls. It's a good matchup in a fast-paced game. So I like James Wiseman here versus the Chicago Bulls. Okay, another center that I like is Jonas Valenjonas from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Jonas Valenjonas has averaged 35.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 29, 47, and 33 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 20, 28, and 26 minutes. He's projected at 35.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 7,300 FanDuel salary and 400 more on DraftKings. Now he scored 11, 30, 31, and 29 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Rockets, but I think he can score 40 plus fantasy points here in this matchup. It's a fast-paced game, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 221.5 points scored in this game. So I like Jonas Valenjonas here versus the Houston Rockets.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.